It started with a banging on my front door. Not a polite knock, but the heavy, rhythmic thud of someone who believed they owned the ground I stood on. I glanced at the security monitor. 2 men. Cheap, ill-fitting security uniforms that looked like they'd been bought from a costume shop. One was tall and thin, with a nervous energy that betrayed his forced aggression. The other was short, stocky, and had the dead-eyed stare of a man who enjoyed being a bully. They weren't cops. I knew what cops looked like, and this wasn't it. I opened the door, not with fear, but with the cold, deliberate patience of a man who has faced down armed fugitives. I didn't speak. I just stood there, letting them fill the silence. The tall one cleared his throat. "We're with community enforcement," he announced, trying to inject authority into his voice. "We have a warrant for your arrest." My eyes flicked past them to the sidewalk. And there she was, Barbara Hendricks. Barb, a woman in her late 50s, dressed in a pristine white pantsuit, her blonde hair coiffed into a helmet of perfection. A smug, triumphant smirk was plastered on her face. This was her masterpiece. She had finally cornered the one man in the neighborhood who refused to bend to her will, and she had brought an audience to watch his public humiliation. This was her victory lap. The shorter thug took a step forward, reaching for my arm. "You're coming with us." Non-payment of HOA fines. I didn't move, I didn't even flinch. I just held up a single hand, a simple gesture that stopped him cold. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a razor. "Before you commit a federal crime," I said, my eyes locking onto his, "I suggest you identify which agency you work for and present a court-issued warrant." The two of them exchanged a confused look. The tall one fumbled with his clipboard. "The warrant was issued by the HOA," he stammered. "We're authorized." "No," I said, the word hanging in the air like a death sentence. "You're not." I let the silence stretch, letting them feel the full weight of the mistake they had just made. Then, slowly, I reached into the pocket of my jacket. The shorter one tensed, his hand instinctively moving to the empty space on his belt, where a real cop would carry a sidearm. I bypassed my own weapon and pulled out a simple black leather credential case. I flipped it open. The afternoon sun glinted off the polished silver star, the iconic, unmistakable star of the United States Marshal's Service. "This is a real badge," I stated, my voice dangerously calm. I let them get a good, long look at it. I watched the blood drain from their faces, the phony bravado evaporating into pure, primal fear. "You two are impersonating law enforcement and attempting to detain a federal officer. You have just destroyed your lives." I paused, then nodded my head towards the sidewalk. And hers. I watched Barb's victorious smirk shatter, replaced by a mask of utter shock and horror. Her perfectly manicured world, her little kingdom of petty tyranny, had just collided with a force she couldn't comprehend. She thought she was the law. She was about to meet the real thing. Let me tell you how we got here. 6 months earlier, I had walked out of the federal courthouse in Houston for the last time as a deputy U.S. Marshal, 30 years on the job. 30 years of hunting the worst humanity had to offer. I wasn't on a SWAT team kicking in doors every day, but I was part of the fugitive task force. My specialty wasn't brute force. It was the hunt. It was finding the unfindable. The monsters who thought they had gotten away. I'd spent months, sometimes years, piecing together financial records, surveillance footage, and witness statements to dismantle criminal organizations from the inside out. I knew how to follow the money, how to exploit legal loopholes, and how to build a case so airtight that by the time we made the arrest, the fight was already over. I was good at it, but I was tired. All I wanted was peace. I found a modest house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in a small, unincorporated town outside the city limits. The key selling point, the one I confirmed 3 times with the realtor and the county clerk's office, was that it was not, under any circumstances, part of a homeowners association. I wanted to park my truck in my own driveway, put up a flagpole for my flag, and not have to ask a committee for permission. I wanted to be left alone. For a while, I was. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly older couples and young families. I became the silent man at the end of the street. I kept my lawn immaculate, my hedges trimmed, and my truck polished. I didn't host parties. I didn't cause trouble. The neighbors, for the most part, seemed to respect that. They'd give me a polite wave, and I'd nod back. One of them, an old Army veteran named Mr. Henderson from 2 doors down, once told me I had a no-nonsense look about me. He meant it as a compliment. He found out just how no-nonsense I could be about a month after I moved in. A roofing contractor had left a pallet of shingles on his lawn for over a week after the job was done, tearing up the grass and creating an eyesore. Mr. Henderson had called them a dozen times, and they kept giving him the runaround. One Saturday morning, I saw the crew foreman in his driveway, yelling at the old man, telling him it would cost extra to move the pallet. I walked over. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make threats. I simply looked at the foreman, then at the contract in Mr. Henderson's trembling hand. "You have him on a fixed-price contract, which includes site cleanup," I said, pointing to the relevant clause. State Code 27.B.4 requires you to remove all materials within 48 hours of job completion, unless otherwise specified. It's been 8 days. You're in breach. Furthermore, I continued, pointing to the oil stain on the driveway from their truck, your liability insurance covers property damage. That stain constitutes damage. The foreman's face went from red to pale. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time, and saw something in my eyes that made him stop arguing. The pallet and the shingles were gone within the hour. Mr. Henderson was eternally grateful. "Jack," he said to me later, "you just have a way of seeing things. You see all the angles." I just nodded. He had no idea. My first direct encounter with Barbara Hendricks happened a week later. She appeared on my doorstep holding a welcome basket full of cheap muffins and a thick folder. "Hello," she chirped, her smile a little too wide, a little too bright. "I'm Barb Hendricks, president of the neighborhood committee." She deliberately avoided the term HOA. Her eyes weren't friendly. They were assessing, scanning my property, my home, me, probing for weakness. I'd spent my life hunting predators. I just never expected to find one running a homeowners association. That folder she handed me was the first shot in her war. It was full of community guidelines and a welcome letter that mentioned a mandatory new resident fee of $500. I thanked her for the muffins, which went straight into the trash, and set the folder on my desk. The next day, I mailed her a polite but firm letter. In it, I included a notarized copy of my property deed and the official plat map from the county registrar's office, which clearly showed my lot was outside the legal boundaries of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. I ended the letter with a simple sentence. "As my property is not subject to your association's covenants, I will not be paying any fees or adhering to any non-applicable guidelines. Regards, Jack Callahan." I thought that would be the end of it. That was my first mistake. I had responded with logic. She responded with aggression. Barb Hendricks had built a kingdom on a foundation of lies. I started digging, and what I found was worse than I imagined. The Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association had started in 1982 as a voluntary social committee. It was for organizing neighborhood barbecues and a Christmas decoration contest. It had no legal authority, no enforcement power, and charged a voluntary $20 a year fee for cookout supplies. When Barb and her husband moved in back in 2019, she saw an opportunity. Through a series of shady meetings with low turnout, she got herself elected president. Then, she and a hand-picked board of her cronies filed paperwork with the state to convert the social committee into a mandatory fee, covenant-controlled HOA. The paperwork was full of forged signatures and misrepresented the scope of the original charter. It was fundamentally fraudulent, but no one had ever bothered to challenge it. Once she had the illusion of power, she began to wield it like a weapon. Her first victims were an elderly couple, the Millers. They'd lived in their house for 40 years. Mrs. Miller loved gardening and had a small, cheerful garden gnome she'd placed by her rose bushes. Barb hit them with a violation notice. Unapproved lawn ornamentation. The fine was $50. They refused to pay. The next week, another fine. $100. Then another for the unapproved color of their welcome mat. Barb buried them in paper, inflating the fines with late fees and administrative charges until the total was in the thousands. Then she did the unthinkable. She placed a fraudulent lien on their house and threatened foreclosure. The Millers, terrified of losing their home and lacking the resources to fight, sold the house in a panic to an investment company that gave them a lowball cash offer. They moved into a small apartment across town. 6 months later, I discovered that the investment company was owned by Barb's nephew. She hadn't just bullied them, she had stolen their home. Her corruption was systemic. The exclusive landscaping contract for the entire neighborhood belonged to a company called Evergreen Landscaping. A quick search of state corporation records revealed it was owned by her brother-in-law. The HOA's financials, which I obtained through a public records request, showed massive overpayments for basic services like lawn mowing and mulching. It was blatant embezzlement, money being funneled from the residents directly into her family's pockets. To protect herself, she had cultivated a relationship with her cousin, a low-level bureaucrat on the city zoning commission, who made sure any official complaints against the HOA mysteriously disappeared before they could be investigated. Barb hadn't just created an HOA, she had created a criminal enterprise. My letter, with its cold, hard facts, wasn't a request for an exemption. It was a direct challenge to the legitimacy of her entire empire, and she couldn't let that stand. Her retaliation was swift. A week after I sent my letter, the first official violation notice arrived in my mailbox via certified mail. $100 for a commercial vehicle parked in a residential area, my Ford F-150. I sent back a copy of the vehicle's registration, showing it was a standard passenger truck. The next week, another notice. $200 for an unauthorized surveillance device, my doorbell camera. I sent back a copy of the state law affirming a homeowner's right to secure their property. Each fine was more absurd than the last. The grass was a 1/4 inch too high. My garbage can was visible from the street for 2 hours too long. A flagpole I hadn't even installed yet was preemptively in violation of height restrictions. She wasn't just trying to annoy me. I recognized the tactic. She was creating a paper trail, building a file of manufactured non-compliance. It was the exact same playbook she had used on the Millers. She was preparing to file a lien. She thought she was building a legal case against me. In reality, she was handing me the evidence I needed to put her in a cage. My quiet study became my new operations center. The peace I had retired for was over, but a different part of me, the part that had spent 30 years hunting predators, was waking up. I sat down at my dining room table with my old laptop, the one I'd used to track fugitives across continents, and I started building a federal case against Barbara Hendricks. I began by deconstructing her organization from the ground up. I pulled the HOA's original 1982 charter from the county archives, a dusty document that confirmed its status as a voluntary committee. Then I pulled the fraudulent conversion documents she had filed in 2019. I scanned the signature pages, my trained eye immediately spotting inconsistencies. I ran the names of the signatories through a public records database. 2 of them had sold their houses and moved out of state a full year before the document was supposedly signed. They were forgeries. This was the cornerstone of the entire fraud. Her HOA had no legal authority because it was never legally created. Next, I followed the money. Using state business filings and property tax records, I created a detailed financial map of Barb's network. The connection to Evergreen Landscaping was the most obvious, but it went deeper. I found 2 other preferred vendors for roofing and plumbing who charged the HOA exorbitant rates, and both were owned by her husband's business partners. It was a classic racketeering scheme, using an organization, the HOA, to enrich herself and her associates through kickbacks and fraudulent contracts. Then came the kill shot. I laid out every violation notice, every threatening letter, every certified mail receipt she had ever sent me. She thought she was being official, using the U.S. mail to create an intimidating paper trail. What the amateur criminal never understands is that the moment you use a federal service to commit a crime, you have invited the full, terrifying power of the federal government into your life. Every single letter she sent demanding money for a fraudulent fine was a separate, indictable count of 18 U.S. Code Section 1341, mail fraud. Combining that with the financial crimes and the extortion of homeowners like the Millers, it wasn't just a civil case anymore. It was a textbook violation of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, the RICO Act, the law designed to dismantle the mafia. I spent the next 2 weeks compiling everything. I created a timeline of events, a financial analysis detailing the flow of money, a list of forged documents, and a summary of the federal statutes she had violated. I reached out to the Miller's son, a young lawyer in the city, who was furious about what had happened to his parents. He gladly provided a sworn affidavit detailing Barb's harassment campaign. I interviewed 3 other neighbors who had been bullied into paying bogus fines, recording their statements. I was no longer just a homeowner defending my property. I was a U.S. Marshal, one last time, building a case. Barb thought this was a battle of fines and yard signs. She had no idea I was building a federal racketeering case on my dining room table. My silent, methodical defiance was driving Barb insane. I wasn't yelling, I wasn't arguing. I was just calmly ignoring her fines and documenting her every move. In her world, problems were solved with intimidation and aggression. My refusal to engage on her terms terrified her because she couldn't control me. So she escalated. She published a special Community Alert newsletter, a single sheet of red paper she had printed and stuffed into every mailbox in the neighborhood. It featured a picture of my house, taken from the street, with a bold headline, "Problem Property Threatens Neighborhood Safety and Values." The article accused me, an unnamed new resident, of refusing to cooperate with community standards, of being hostile to neighbors, and hinted that I was a potential danger. It was a smear campaign designed to isolate me, to turn the other residents against me. It didn't work. Most of my neighbors knew it was nonsense, but it was a sign of her desperation. Her next move was more direct. One morning I was working in my garage when a large tow truck backed into my driveway. The driver got out and started hooking a chain to the front axle of my F-150. I walked out and stood in front of the truck. "What do you think you're doing?" I asked. The driver, a big man with a greasy shirt, just grunted. "Got an order from the HOA to tow this vehicle. Unauthorized commercial truck." I didn't argue. I didn't get angry. I pulled out my phone. "This is private property," I stated calmly. "You have no legal authority to be here, and you certainly have no right to attach anything to my vehicle. State Statute 45C makes it clear that a non-consensual tow from private residential property requires a court order or a request from law enforcement. You have neither. If you don't unhook my truck and leave my property immediately, I will be filing a complaint for felony theft." I held up my phone, which was now recording him. His eyes widened. He had been told this was a simple impound. He realized he was being used as a pawn in Barb's game. He muttered an apology, unhooked the chain, and drove away. I watched him go, then looked down the street. I could see the curtain on Barb's front window twitch. She had been watching, and she was furious. That was the final straw for her. My calm, legal-based resistance had broken her. She couldn't bully me, she couldn't smear me, and she couldn't physically seize my property. Driven to the absolute edge of her sanity, she made the final, fatal mistake. She decided she needed to remove me. She found a company online called Community Enforcement Services, a pathetic name for two thugs who had lost their security licenses for excessive force complaints. She met them in a parking lot and paid them cash. Their mission: go to Jack Callahan's house, put him in cuffs, and drag him out in front of the whole neighborhood, humiliate him, break him. And so we come back to that Friday afternoon. The two fake cops on my porch, the neighbors peeking through their blinds, Barb on the sidewalk, savoring what she believed was her ultimate victory. She had no idea she hadn't just brought two fake cops to my door. She had brought the final, crucial pieces of evidence I needed to spring my trap. When I revealed my badge, the shift in the atmosphere was instantaneous. The air crackled with a new kind of tension. The shorter thug, who had been trying so hard to look intimidating, now looked like a frightened child. The tall one was trying to speak, but only a dry, croaking sound came out. I kept my voice low and even, the same tone I used when I was talking a fugitive into surrendering peacefully. "You are both under federal investigation for 18 U.S. Code Section 912, impersonating an officer and attempting to detain a federal agent under color of law. Right now, you have one chance to mitigate the damage to your lives. You're going to give me your real names, and you are going to tell me exactly who hired you to do this." They crumbled. There was no hesitation. The tall one's finger shot out, shaking as he pointed directly at Barbara Hendricks. "Her! She paid us! She said you were just some stubborn old guy." I kept my eyes on them for a moment longer. Then I turned my head and looked at Barb. Her face was a canvas of disbelief and terror. She took a step back, then another, as if she could somehow escape the reality of what was happening. Her little kingdom was gone. Her power was an illusion. The trap had been sprung. I didn't call 911. Local police would just complicate things, get tangled up in jurisdictional questions. My case wasn't local, it was federal. I made one phone call. I dialed the direct line of my old partner at the U.S. Marshal's office in Houston. "Dave," I said, "it's Jack." I explained the situation in less than a minute. Attempted unlawful arrest, impersonating officers, all part of a larger RICO case I had been building. He didn't question me. He just said, "Who do you need?" "Patch me through to the U.S. Attorney's office," I said, "the chief of the Public Corruption Unit." A moment later, a new voice was on the line. I introduced myself and said, "I have a gift for you." A complete, ready-to-prosecute case file on a multi-year racketeering operation being run out of a suburban HOA. I have financial records, forged documents, sworn witness statements, and 2 suspects in my driveway who are ready to confess. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Then, "Where are you, mister?" "Callahan?" The federal response was not like what you see on television. It wasn't loud and chaotic. It was quiet, swift, and terrifyingly efficient. Within 24 hours, a team of FBI agents executed a search warrant on Barbara Hendricks's house. There were no sirens, just a few dark sedans pulling up to the curb. They were in and out in less than 2 hours, carrying out boxes of documents, computers, and financial records. At the same time, 2 agents from the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, the law enforcement arm people always forget exists, and the ones who take mail fraud more seriously than anyone on the planet, visited the local post office and seized all records related to the HOA's post office box. The shockwaves spread quickly. The 2 fake cops I had detained were picked up and, facing a long list of federal charges, gave full confessions, detailing how Barb had hired them and what she had instructed them to do. Barb's brother-in-law at Evergreen Landscaping got a visit from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Her cousin on the Zoning Commission was met by 2 FBI agents in his office at City Hall. He resigned his position that same afternoon. The other HOA board members, the cronies who had enabled Barb's tyranny for years, saw the house of cards collapsing. One by one, they lawyered up and cut deals, racing to be the first to offer testimony against Barb in exchange for leniency. Her shield of impunity, so carefully constructed, had been shattered in a single day. The story exploded in the local news, then went regional. Suburban HOA president at center of federal racketeering probe. They called her the Queen of the Cul-de-sac. Her picture was everywhere. Her reputation, the only thing she truly cared about, was incinerated. The final act was poetic. A week later, a federal arrest warrant was issued for Barbara Hendricks, and the U.S. Attorney's Office, as a professional courtesy to me, assigned the warrant to the Houston Fugitive Task Force. It wasn't my old team, but it was the next best thing. They didn't come for her in the middle of the night. They came on a bright, sunny Saturday morning when the entire neighborhood was outside, mowing their lawns and washing their cars. 2 dark sedans pulled up to her curb. 4 U.S. Marshals wearing tactical vests with the iconic star emblazoned on the back walked up her driveway. There was no yelling, no resistance. They led her out in handcuffs. The same woman who had tried to have me dragged out of my home in humiliation was now being perp-walked in front of the very people she had terrorized. As they put her in the back of the car, her eyes met mine across the street. There was no anger in them, only the cold, hollow realization that she had picked a fight with a force she couldn't possibly defeat. The trial was a formality. My case file was so thorough, so detailed, that her defense attorney advised her to plead guilty to a slew of charges, including mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The judge, citing the predatory nature of her crimes against the elderly and the blatant abuse of her position, made an example of her. He sentenced her to 5 years in federal prison, not a country club facility, but a real, hard-time federal correctional institution. With Barb gone, her corrupt empire crumbled to dust. A federal judge signed a court order officially dissolving the Oak Ridge Estates HOA, declaring it a fraudulent enterprise from its inception. The class action lawsuit filed by the miller's son, now representing over 24 families, won a massive judgment against Barb's frozen assets. Every homeowner who had ever paid a bogus fine, a fraudulent fee, or an illegal assessment got a full refund, with interest. The houses she had stolen were returned to their rightful owners or their families. The neighborhood changed overnight. The cloud of fear and oppression that had hung over it for years was gone. People started talking to each other again. They planted flowers in unapproved colors. They put up basketball hoops. They reclaimed their homes. I was hailed as a local hero, a title I neither wanted nor encouraged. I had done what I had to do. My war was over. I finally had my peace. The final scene came a few months later. I was sitting on my front porch, drinking a cup of coffee in the quiet morning sun. The air was still. The only sound was the distant hum of a lawnmower. Mr. Henderson walked past on his morning constitutional. He stopped, looked at my house, then looked at me. He didn't say anything. He just gave me a slow, respectful nod, a look of profound gratitude in his eyes. I nodded back. I took a sip of my coffee, a small, satisfied smile on my face. Justice had been served. The neighborhood was finally quiet.